Pues vamos a dar paso a la primera conferencia de la jornada. Para ello, invitamos a un colega del Instituto Tecnológico de Massachusetts, el doctor David Dixon. David actualmente se desempeña como director de Educación e Innovación en Inteligencia Artificial en algo que se llama Horizonte MIT, que pertenece a un área de MIT que se llama Aprendizaje Abierto. Esto es en el Instituto Tecnológico de Massachusetts, en Cambridge, en Estados Unidos. Recientemente David trabajó con el Laboratorio Global de Educación Yamil de MIT, del cual la UNAM somos miembros, liderando sus esfuerzos en inteligencia artificial y educación. Él aporta un profundo conocimiento del tema sobre interacciones entre humanos y computadoras, el análisis de decisiones y la estrategia tecnológica desarrollados durante 15 años de experiencia a la vanguardia en este tema. Su carrera abarca la educación, pero también el mundo académico y el mundo de la industria. Dave tiene un doctorado en Trabajo, Tecnología y Organizaciones, una maestría en Sociología y una maestría en Ciencias de la Gestión e Ingeniería por la Universidad de Stanford en Estados Unidos. Y su investigación se centra en los procesos de aprendizaje, la creación de conocimiento y la interfaz de los comportamientos humanos y la tecnología. Antes de trabajar en MIT, también él trabajó 2 años con exfuncionarios de la Casa Blanca y líderes de la industria de tecnología educativa para imaginar una educación superior rediseñada para el futuro. Él, como orador y asesor frecuente en escuelas y universidades sobre inteligencia artificial y educación, está comprometido con la IA ética y se centra en cómo podemos aprovecharla de forma proactiva para mejorar y ampliar los esfuerzos educativos en todo el mundo, y ha trabajado en varios continentes, en lugares como Kenia, China y muchos otros lugares. David es padre dedicado de 6 hijos, de entre 3 y 14 años, y él y su esposa, como él dice, comenzaron la paternidad con gemelos y nunca miraron para atrás. Los roles que más aprecia son los de su familia. Los niños alimentan su pasión por mejorar los resultados educativos para todos y ayudar a las personas a prepararse para prosperar en un mundo con una inteligencia artificial cada vez más poderosa. David, pues bienvenido virtualmente a México. Esperamos que eventualmente puedas acompañarnos de manera presencial. Como ya comentó Anaís, David va a dar su conferencia en el idioma inglés. La plataforma de Zoom que tenemos disponible tiene subtítulos donde ustedes tienen que activarlos, como vienen las instrucciones ahí, para que puedan ver los subtítulos en español, ¿no? Y pues, David, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I was able to follow along on captions, so I appreciate that. Let me share my screen and we'll get going. Okay, as you've heard, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence in the future of education. Being able to follow along with what everyone has been saying has been very exciting because I can feel that you're taking it seriously. And I believe that artificial intelligence is going to impact every way, every part of how we live, but I think that it's going to impact education faster than just about anywhere else. So I work right now with MIT Horizon, and we get to work with governments and institutions and companies all around the world. They come to us and we help to train their people, to train their workforce or their teachers or anything on what AI is going to mean for them. And I still don't believe that any of them are going to be impacted as fast as education is. And the reason for that is simple. It's that your students already have access to it. And so whether we adapt or not, they already have. So there's so much we could talk about, but I want to give a bit of an overview of where I think we're at right now and the things where we can be spending the most amount of time. Put in questions in the chat. I apologize, I don't speak Spanish, but Dr. Sanchez will help me field some of those questions. Okay, so what does AI mean for education? That's the question. And there's lots of different guesses, but luckily we've been doing this for a couple years now, and so we have some sense of where we're going. But let's start with this. How many people are using it? I'm going to show 2 different studies. So this one is interesting to me because in this study, approximately 50% of students are using ChatGPT at least weekly. What's interesting, if you look at this graph, about 50% of teachers are using ChatGPT at least weekly, and at least 50% of parents are using ChatGPT at least weekly. And so it doesn't matter what level of education you're talking about. People all across the board, from the very top to the very bottom, are finding that there are useful ways to use ChatGPT, and they're also finding ways that they're very worried about and very concerned about. And we'll talk a little bit more about those, but I think everybody has a good sense of things that we're worried about. And so today I'm going to be focusing more on the opportunity and less on the threat, because I think that we're at a pivotal moment for getting to choose if we're going to go positive or negative. So this is a different study. This one came out of Australia. And this was a study they did of 8,000 students across 4 universities recently in just the last few months, which is nice because AI has changed so much. And so the question was, are they using AI? Here's the answer. 83% of students said, I use AI for my studies. Um, about half said I use it weekly or daily for my studies, and 2/3 said they believe it offers significant benefits to their to them. So what are they using it for? Well, how are they using it? 80% to answer my questions. So I think there's a negative way to read that, which I think is incorrect, which is to answer the questions for my test, because hopefully their teachers aren't giving them tests that could be that easily answered by AI. But instead, it's because they have questions. They want to understand things, and that's hard to do in a classroom setting. It's almost impossible to do in a textbook setting. But with AI, you can do that. You can ask any question from wherever you're coming from, and it can help you. So number one, not surprising, is to answer questions. Next is to create written text, then to analyze documents and data, to create images or other visual media, or to create code. A third of them are using it to create code or technical output, which we'll talk about more in a little bit, because that's one of the most exciting things I think about this is that we can now build things without having to be trained in coding, which is very useful for educators. So why are they using AI in their studies? Well, there's 3 main reasons that are all exactly the same: because it makes things easier for them, it makes things faster for them, and it helps them get unstuck or overcome blocks, places where they're confused and they couldn't really progress unless they either were able to talk directly to a teacher or they could somehow look it up on a YouTube video or Google the answer, and now they can ask AI. These are useful things. It also improves the quality of their work. This is a nice thing as educators, because if we're designing our curriculum well, we can expect higher quality output because they have their own personal helper at home who can help them, and helps them to do things they could not do otherwise. So main takeaway here is they're using it. This is why AI is going to have an impact in education faster than in business, because in business, you can still survive without using AI right now. The people who use AI are getting productivity benefits, but they're not putting the other ones out of business. In education, the students already have it. And even though other studies show that a good portion of them feel guilty about using it, even if they're not using it to cheat, they feel guilty about it. Most of them understand that this is helpful, and even if they feel guilty, they still use it. So this is important for us to know, because this is out there. We have a choice. We have a challenge, which is we either adapt or we don't. And this is one of the first technologies I've seen where I truly believe that we have only 2 choices. Things are for education. It's either going to get better or it's going to get worse. And we get to decide which one of those choices we make. I think some of us want to pretend that maybe things can sort of be the same as they've always been before. But that's not an option, because the same is worse. Because if we're doing things the same, when I was teaching classes, I used to be the head of a business program. And when I was teaching classes, a lot of my assignments looked a little bit like this in business. A lot of the assignments looked like, here's 10 pages of stuff to read. Go read this. Then I want you to write a 200-word response on what you learned from it. Then I'm going to grade it. Then we're going to come into class and we're going to hopefully have some good discussions. And then I'm going to give you new assignments. Well, there's a couple problems with that now, obviously. One, it is, instead of taking those 10 pages and reading every single word, which I don't think most of my students were doing anyway then, but if if that was even a possibility, then now it's very easy to throw that into AI, obviously, and have AI teach you. Now, we don't actually have good data on if that's better or worse. I know as educators that feels worse, and in some cases it is really important to teach to have them be reading exactly every single word, especially in literature classes where how the words are formed is what's really important. But when we're trying to teach concepts, like in business education where I was, um, we don't have data on if it's better or worse. We already know that students are very busy and they're very often skimming. Well, what happens if you skim but have AI help you? I don't know. I'm sure in the next year or two we'll have much better data on that, but that's one part of it. Then just having 200 or 300 word response is also very problematic in a world where AI exists because they can just, do that in 5 seconds. And if I kept my classes the same, I would be stressed all the time that my students are cheating. I would be very suspicious about them. And my students, and I've talked to a lot of students, my students will be able to feel that too. There are a lot of students that I've talked to who are complaining about how the um, the suspicion that comes from their teachers means that the more work a student puts into their homework, the more work that they do, the better they make it, the more suspicious the teacher is that they used AI. That is not a failure of the students. That's a failure of how we're building our classes. And so because we can only get better or get worse, if we keep things the same way, then education gets worse because AI, as it's currently built, breaks that. Now, the good news is, as much as I like to think my classes were amazing, just reading and lecture and doing a little 200-word response is not very good pedagogy. It's not great teaching. All of us know that, but there's reasons why we've been stuck doing that. And we'll talk about those in a second. But first, I want to show this video. I apologize, it's in English, but this came out of MIT late last year. And one of the professors here was asked what impact he thinks AI is going to have on education. He brings up a point that I think should guide a lot of what we're talking about today.
But just when you think about the link between technology and learning, and maybe actually also you mentioned something about like the MIT view on this. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of those past waves and how people have thought about technology and education and how you think that might apply to this moment.
Sure. Thanks, Philip, and it's great to be part of this discussion. And thanks again to the organizers for putting this together and inviting. And I do think that there have been these sort of waves of technologies that ripple through society. And each time there's a new wave of technology, I think we always need to consider how are we going to integrate this into our learning environments? How is it going to affect learning and education? And I think there are important choices to make. It's not something that just is automatic of what's going to happen. And now as I see the next wave of AI with generative AI and sort of this latest wave, a thing that encourages me and makes it, and I think is an interesting opportunity, I do think there are greater possibilities now of using this new wave of technology to support either instructionists or constructionists. So I think there's a lot more that we can make some decisions how we want to make use of it. So it's encouraging that we have opportunities to use it in different ways. I will, though, say what's discouraging when I look at what's happening in my mind in the ed tech world, most of them I think are using this technology just to reinforce traditional approaches to education. So it's discouraging how it's getting out there in the world in my mind. There's just reinforcing some traditional approaches to education when I think real big changes are needed. But I think there's great opportunity, but also some signs of discouragement and things that, about the way it's actually getting adopted in schools.
Yeah.
Okay, I love that because his biggest worry about AI isn't that it's going to change too much. His biggest worry is that it's going to change too little. And I feel the same way because our traditional approaches to education are deeply flawed, and it's not our fault. It's because there's lots of challenges that have made us have to do it the way we've done it for 1,000 years. And because of that, we've gotten used to this being the best way, but we don't need to keep doing it that way because artificial intelligence does provide us new opportunities. There's obviously threats too, but let's talk about the opportunities. So AI can enhance education if we choose. It can enhance it by personalizing and enhancing learning experiences. I'm sure everybody in this conference has already talked a lot about these things over the last 2 years, but how we can improve learning experiences for learners, for students. That's a big part of it. Another one is empowering and supporting teachers, helping teachers do things better, giving them a resource, helping them do things they couldn't do before, helping them do things faster. There's so many different ways that well-built artificial intelligence can support and enhance the teacher's ability to do more things better. And it can expand access to more learners. I saw in some of the comments that came before me how important it is to you that this not become a digital divide, that this not increase inequality. And I feel the same way, because there's a chance that this goes poorly and it just ends up being some people get trained on AI, get to use AI, get great access to AI, and they get a much better educational experience than those who don't, or who don't have access to it, or who can't use it and have to um, uh, pass on all of those opportunities. We don't have to have it be that way, because AI can be a democratizing power, because it can help us expand access to more learners. We have to be thoughtfully making the decisions to turn it that way and not to divide into the haves and the have-nots. So let's look at what teachers are worried about and excited about. So here's what they're excited. And this is from a study. Things that they're encouraged about: the ability that AI will help them explore innovation education technologies, personalized learning and teaching, save time, and professional development. All good things, which means help them learn. And but their concerns: reliability and accuracy concerns, the infamous hallucinations, reduced human interaction, privacy and data security, and lack of institutional support. So the concerns are interesting here, because we hear about the first one a lot, hallucinations, and maybe it's wrong. The second one, reduced human interaction. Is this going to replace humans? And in what ways can it replace humans? In what ways can it not? Even if you think of perfect AI that never made mistakes, where do humans belong in there? That's what we need to be thinking. Privacy and data security are obviously big issues. And then lack of institutional support is very different depending on where you're at and who your boss is and what you have access to. So there's a lot going on here, a lot of opportunity. Oh, and over-reliance on ChatGPT. I forgot the fifth thing. Yeah. I would say a lot of teachers are very concerned about that. Luckily, we have control over that, because how we build and design our courses will determine, especially how much they over-rely on ChatGPT, how much it replaces humans, and how much they may get mistakes or no mistakes in what they're being taught. That's the good news. We have control. The bad news is it'll take a lot of work. No matter what, it's going to take a lot of work. There's not a way to just keep doing what we've been doing and hope to get the good things out of AI. University of Cambridge had a couple professors do some great lectures on this, and I'm taking some sections out. Now, I'm going to read the English, but I translated it into Spanish so that you can read that while I'm reading English. Don't know if it's a good translation. I hope so. But talking specifically about AI, they say with its rapid growth, and especially the leap from version 3 to 4, they're talking about ChatGPT, this conversation about banning it becomes irrelevant. Transformations will accelerate as these systems train themselves, and indeed this is already happening. The question is not whether to use ChatGPT in schools, but how to do so safely, effectively, and appropriately. Schools need to take the initiative and figure that out, or risk putting themselves and their students at a disadvantage. I really think the question is very urgent for this sector. I'm worried that the same urgency is not characterizing our response. I am too. My worry is that not enough educators, and I think that this university, UNAM, is on the cutting edge of taking it more seriously than the vast majority of educators are. But in most educational institutions, there's a small group of people who take it seriously, in a positive way. There's a group of people who think it's horrible and terrible and they will never touch it. And then there's a group that thinks that it's not even real, that it's all hype. And whether or not there's some hype in the marketing of AI or not, students wouldn't be using it so much if it was just hype. Teachers wouldn't be using it so much if it was just hype. Parents wouldn't be using it so much if it was just hype. So we need to be responding faster and better and more dramatically, even though it takes work on the front end. And I would suggest that as we're building our responses, we don't build our responses for the AI that exists today. We build our responses for what AI could be in, imagine, 5 years from now, because AI is changing so fast and improving so rapidly that wherever it goes, if we're always building to whatever it's at right now, then we're always going to be a little bit behind and playing catch up. If we start to rethink education and rethink the way we teach classes in a way that puts us forward a few years into stronger, more powerful, more correct versions of AI, even though the ones we have right now are very powerful, we're going to be building something that's more sustainable because it'll help us think of it correctly. So here's one other quote from that one different professor. ChatGPT represents a tipping point in the development of AI, and we teachers ignore it at our peril. For educators, it's going to be as transformational as Google was in 1998 and requires a serious conversion about conversation about the benefits, challenges, and implications for schools and learners. The future will be changed by it indelibly. Educators have to start engaging with it in a meaningful way. That last line is key. Start engaging with it in a meaningful way. I think most people in this conference who are listening to me right now have already engaged with it, but you probably know a lot of people who have not engaged with it. And this is vital because there's no way to teach, and this is probably very frustrating to all of your institutional leaders. There's no way to teach everybody how to use ChatGPT or how to use AI in their classes, because how a teacher teaching physics or one teaching writing or one teaching math or one teaching science or one teaching history is going to use it is all going to be very different. And one history teacher's class is very different from a different history teacher's class. So it's very difficult. This is a technology that's very difficult to teach from the top down how exactly to use it in every single class setting, which means that people need to be experimenting. It could shift the focus of education towards critical thinking and big questions. So this is going to be one of the points that I'm going to make today, that we are making, is that the goal isn't that we just have to play defense, that we just have to change the way we do education because there's a new technology. As Dr. Resnick said in that video, it's that we have an opportunity to fix the things that we've been stuck doing for hundreds of years that we know are not great and move towards something better, because this allows us to fill in gaps that we could have never done before. We aren't teaching the best way, but it's been the best we can do. And I'm not saying this to anyone specifically. I'm saying this to virtually all educational institutions because we've had certain constraints. Here's why we teach the way we do. We teach whole classes at once. In almost all settings, we're teaching an entire class. Some of your classes, maybe if they're lucky, have 20 or 30 or 50 students in them. Some of them, if you're at universities like I was at, some of them are going to have 500, 600, 700 students in a class at once. How do you teach that many students at once? We know that one-on-one teaching is better than classroom teaching, or 1-on-50 teaching, I should say. So we're teaching a whole class at once, and each student is interested in different things, is motivated by different things, knows different things, and is trying to use this education to build their unique and different life. So they're always trying to draw a connection between, how can this help me? What does this mean for me? Well, when you have 50 or 100 or hundreds of people in one class, it's impossible for a teacher to be able to know, understand, and build those connections for all of those students individually. Also, each student has a different educational background. They have a different family background. They have a different cultural background. They have a different financial background. They're coming from different stations in life. And this influences what they can learn. It also influences what they want to learn. And it also influences what they're going to connect it to, how it's going to make the most sense to them. So this is one of the challenges that we've always had. Now, on top of that, we don't have unlimited money. We don't have unlimited time, and we don't have unlimited technology. And so this is why we've been stuck for hundreds of years teaching the way we do, even though we all know that being one-on-one with one teacher and one student would always be better than being 1-on-50. We haven't had that opportunity. Well, we have some changes now, but let's look at that. So much of modern teaching is based on lecture and reading. Now, I know you have had a million classes teaching you that those are not ideal, but still so much of our education system has been built around lecture and reading. They're getting a lecture in class or they're reading something out of a textbook, right? Well, studies in memory retention indicate that student retention after 1 week for lecture is about 5% of what we hear. Reading is about 10% of what we read. Audiovisual, 20% of what we hear and see. Demonstration, 30%. Discussion group, 50%. Practice by doing, 75%. Teaching others or immediately using it, 90%. Now, the concept behind this is clear. The further we can move down that list, the better it is for our students. When it's one teacher teaching 10, 20, 50, or 100 students, we're usually stuck in the top couple. Or maybe we can get audiovisual things in there. Maybe we can do some demonstrations. If we use artificial intelligence well, if we figure out ways to design it into each individual course in a way that makes sense and is useful, we get to push down. We get to do more demonstrations, more discussions, more practice by doing, especially, and even teaching others. Because the classroom time, when we're all together, instead of that being a way to just deliver information to them, they can have had that information delivered to them before the class. They can have learned so many things before they came into class. And then when they come into class, instead of a lecture, they get to practice by doing, they get to have discussion groups, they get to do presentations, they get to do activities, they get to teach each other. There are so many different ways that we as teachers suddenly go, we have a way to design how they're taught, and then we have a way to actually design what we do in the class. So let's look at that. Luckily, a great study. It's relatively small. They were only able to do it with one class, but they still have, which is amazing then that they have statistically significant outcomes. So a study that came out of Harvard this year is AI tutoring outperforms active learning. Now that word active learning is a big deal because we all know that passive learning is bad. Passive learning is what I was just talking about. Passive learning is when we are just reading out of a textbook or just listening to a lecture. That's passive learning. Active learning is when it's way more involved, when there's back and forth, there's conversations, there's discussions, there's those sorts of things. Even against active learning, they built a really good, nicely designed experiment where they had one group of students learning in a good active learning classroom and the other one using AI tutoring. Now, they designed their own AI tutoring. What that doesn't mean that they coded a big complicated thing that nobody else could do. In fact, I would encourage you to read this study and figure out what they did. Because what they did essentially to get around, for example, hallucinations, to make sure there were no mistakes, they gave the AI the answers up front. They said, this is the right answer to these problems. Here's a good step-by-step way to teach it to make sure the AI was doing it right. But then they essentially just gave it to the students and said, you use AI to learn, and you guys are going to use a traditional active learning classroom. Here's a quote from that study. Although passive lectures are among the least effective modes of instruction, they remain in wide use. Passive lectures have several long-known issues. They move too quickly for some students and too slowly for others because the teacher controls the pace of instruction. Students do not receive personalized feedback to their questions as they arise, and they fail to maintain consistent student engagement. So these are the problems with lectures. I go back. We haven't been doing anything wrong because we've been using lectures. We've been in a situation where that's the best we can do because we only have one teacher for a ton of students, and we didn't have any other way around that. That's what artificial intelligence changes. So they decided to put that to the test and see what happens. So they said the AI tutor was developed with the same pedagogical best practices as the lectures. So in other words, they said, we're going to make better lectures, active learning lectures, and we're going to make an AI tutor that uses those same practices. We find that students learn more than twice as much in less time when using an AI tutor compared with the active learning class. They also feel more engaged and more motivated. So this is one study, and I'll show you the actual results in a sec. But I want to say that again. In their experiment, they find that students learn more than twice as much in less time when using an AI tutor compared with the active learning class. So in other words, compared to the best version of how we do things right now, the students also feel more engaged and more motivated. So let's look at that. Here's the learning gains in AI versus active lecture. So the bar on the far left is the pre-score. The bar in the middle is the post-score. So after the lesson, with good active lecture principles, this is how much more they learned. They went from about a 2.7 to a 3.5. And then the ones who used AI, the AI tutor instead, they went from 2.7 to a 4.4. So you see it is a much bigger jump up in knowledge, more than double what the people using the active lecture, the good class, were able to learn. That's a huge finding. Small class needs to be replicated in a million different ways, but it's showing a principle of what's possible, which is that a well-designed AI personal tutor, if you will, can do a lot. Now, this may sound intimidating, but I will tell you, having done this for the last 2 years, it's not nearly as intimidating as you think. Any teacher can, with just a few hours, will be able to figure out how they could build, for example, a custom GPT that teaches a certain thing. And once you figure out how to do it once and you get it to the students and you test it a few times, you'll be able to have a really effective tutor on that one topic. And as soon as you've kind of figured out how to do it, then you can expand it to other topics, until eventually you have all your topics, or at least all of the difficult ones, or all the ones that make sense to you. You'll have them all covered with your own personal AI tutor that you built. And hopefully you shared with other professors and they shared with you, and you all helped each other build these things together. You don't need to wait for the university to build its own AI tutor, because any AI tutor is going to be expert in something. It's hard to make one that'll be expert in everything. So here's another one that's interesting. The learning experience for AI versus active learning. The dark bar is the students who had the AI, and the light bar is the students who had the lecture. And you can see the students who got to use the AI were more engaged and were more motivated in a statistically significant way. And considering the relatively small size of this experiment, it's pretty crazy that they were able to get statistical significance in this. And it's because they, as we discussed with the problems of lecture and generally the way we introduce things in class, you don't have that with AI. You don't have, it's not going too fast for you. If it is, you just say slow down. It fills in gaps for you if you ask it to. It connects it to personal things in your life if you tell it to. And so if it's built well into the course, you can be solving a lot of problems. So there's a lot of great work being done in this area, hundreds of studies. I'm not going to talk about almost any more of them, but here's one where they were using AI to teach in the coding class. And they were talking about the difference between GPT-3 to 4. And I love this quote right here, though. They say, in the near future, it is reasonable to expect LLMs to facilitate teacher-student exchanges similar to those that only occur in a classroom and are invaluable to student learning. In other words, it's reasonable for us to expect that what you're able to do to some extent, if you were able to go and sit and talk to every single student, if you have the time to be sitting at the desk with them while they're listening and answer their questions and pressing pause on the presentation when they don't understand, or speeding it up when they already understand and they want to go deeper, they're saying it's reasonable to expect that AI is going to be able to do that in the near future, and in many cases can do it right now. One aspect of how we have to rebuild our classes is that, and this is something concrete. I saw that the Secretary General wanted us to be concrete. So here's something that's much more concrete, is that assessments matter more. Tests are more important now. And I don't think enough people are talking about this because tests provide motivation. So here's why assessments matter more now than ever before and how to improve them. So they must give motivation. So that means, one, your test needs to be impossible to cheat with ChatGPT, or as close as possible to that. In some areas, that'll be easier than others, right? That's a little bit harder in a writing class where they're supposed to write a 10-page, paper, and that'll be a challenge. Harder, but possible. In other areas, it won't be as hard. So every school does it differently. Every person does it differently. But as a principal, you need to make your test so that they can't really be cheated. This matters because if the test is well built, then it becomes motivation to learn, not to cheat, but to learn. And so even if everything beforehand, they're using ChatGPT or something like it, they're then using it to learn. So if I'm a student and I know what the test is going to be, and I know that I can't cheat on the test, or that it would be very, very, it would take like Ocean's 11, level of operation to be able to cheat on the test. Then I go, okay, then I actually need to learn it. Well, then as a teacher, hopefully we can say, use whatever resources are available to you. Maybe there's a textbook, maybe there's other things, but hopefully there's also ChatGPT and hopefully custom things that you built for them too. Because if they can, then they'll be using AI to learn what they need to learn instead of using AI to cheat on the assignment. This also means that our assignments change, right? And that's fine because if our tests are properly motivating students to actually learn, then our assignments don't need to be doing that work so much. In the past, we've assumed that our assignments are going to create a lot of useful cognitive effort, or in other words, that they're going to, we just trust that the assignments are going to make learning happen in the brain of the student. Well, when properly motivated, things are different and they can use some of the best materials possible, including AI, to learn. To do that, what we're testing needs to be clear and transparent, meaning we need to have a very good open list whenever possible of exactly what the test is going to contain, exactly what rubric it is. Too many times, teachers in the past will just say, here's a chapter from the textbook, and I'm going to test you on the chapter. That's not useful because, one, even if they memorized every word in there, which they can't do, but even if they memorized every word, it doesn't mean that they necessarily understood all the concepts that you want them to understand. Because a textbook has to teach in a way that's teaching that can be theoretically understood by everyone. And so those sorts of tests drive students crazy because they don't know what's important and they don't know what they should learn. But instead, if you have a very clear list of here's the things I expect you to learn, that I expect you to know, then they can use whatever they need to use to learn those things and to prepare for the test. So how we do assessments is going to matter a lot more, which is good because it then switches what we're able to do in the class. So then the students can use AI to learn rather than to cheat. So AI can help instructors apply better teaching techniques that are proven to improve learning, but that used to require a lot of resources. AI for writing. This is one of the ones, there's a lot of people who freak out about AI for writing. And here's a quote. We believe that generative AI is the most influential technology in writing in decades. Nothing since the word processor has promised as much impact, and generative AI is moving much faster. So this is from a few top writing professors in the United States, and we see it. 5 top Pulitzer Prize finalists said that they used AI in their work. The top literary prize in Japan used ChatGPT extensively. A Chinese professor won an award for one that he actually wrote all entirely with AI. The point isn't here if you read any of these interviews with these writers, it wasn't that they offloaded their work to the writing or to GPT. It's that they used GPT to help them be more creative. They used it to get feedback on their work when there wasn't another person who was available. They had it take a persona, or they had it play devil's advocate and help them poke holes in their work, or improve things, or find logical flaws, or brainstorm. And so AI can help with writing, but it can also do something we couldn't do. I'm a writer, and I love AI, using AI in my writing because, and when I say that, I mean using AI to help me write, because what it can do is it can give me line by line feedback on what I did well and what I did wrong. So I write something, I throw it in, and I say, hey, I want you to check for these things. It comes back and it's like, well, you didn't do it here. You're kind of doing it here. You messed up here. This is a great sentence, and here's why. Writing teachers would love to be able to do that much detail for all their students, but they can't, right? ChatGPT can. The problem is, of course, that the way we do assignments and tests makes it easier to cheat. So we have to play defense there. We have to reevaluate how we do those things, and then be able to say, hey, but wouldn't it be nice if we had a nice writing tutor who could give you line by line feedback on what to do back and forth better on specific things? Here's how to make a persuasive argument. Here's how to make a good, clear thesis statement. Those are all things that it can help with. I use writing as an example because it's one of the ones that people are most worried about is going away because ChatGPT can write. But it doesn't have to mess up our education. It just changes the way we build our classes. So what we're looking for now is experiential and collaborative learning. Every teacher now is an ed tech designer. You can build stuff. engaging, personalized, collaborative, flexible, adaptive. I'm going to give you an example of something I built yesterday. So with just a paragraph in 20 minutes, you can create programs that have never existed or were expensive or hard to find, and they cost you nothing. They cost you almost no time. What you have to do is experiment, experiment, experiment. So I used Claude artifacts. So there's ChatGPT is one of the main ones. Google's got a whole suite of things that's amazing. And there's a company called Claude, which some of you know and many of you probably don't. Claude, their competitor with ChatGPT does a thing called artifacts. And artifacts means that it just builds programs for you that you can use right there. So you don't even have to take the code, go put it onto a website, render it, all those sorts of things. So I'll show you what I built yesterday. I just told it to create so I said, I'm going to build something to help teach supply and demand. And so I said, this is my actual prompt. Create an interactive simulator with text descriptions that teaches people the law of supply and demand. You should build it in artifacts, use whatever approach is best, explain at a level that non-specialists understand, make the explanation interactive. Everything needs to work, make it visually interesting. And then, because you were my audience, it made it, and then I just said, make it even better, and make a toggle so that I can switch all written content into English or Spanish. 2 prompts, that's it. And now I'm going to see, there we go, hopefully you can all see. Here's what I built. There you go. You can see this, I can make demand and supply go up and down. You see price, quantity. You can see how it affects things when supply goes up. I can say, what about an economic boom? What about a recession? What about a market surplus? What about the supply shortage? And then there's this little button right here. I can just switch everything into Spanish. And it has all the same functionality, and all that happened, and I can reset the whole thing. And all that was done with just one little prompt. And so you can see how for a student who's trying to understand how the supply and demand curves work, having this interactive element that you just shared, you just made a link and shared it with them, and then all of a sudden they can play around with it. You could turn it into a game. You could turn it into a simulation. You could do whatever you want. So I gave this as an example because this took me 2 minutes to make, maybe 3 minutes, in both English and Spanish. Because what this lets you do is build programs that your students can use to help them learn. Got to get back to the slides. There we go. So I put this one in Spanish again, but I call this in English. I call this to create. So what we should be doing is creating a prompt spellbook, or in other words, a collection of things that have worked really well. And what has to be key about this is that this has to be something we share. The more we share it, too many of us are so embarrassed to be using AI or afraid that we're going to get in trouble or that we're cheating or something that we don't share. But we need to be sharing because so much of this is based on experimentation. And so the more that we can share, if I was running a business department again right now, I would have a business department spell book where everybody puts in their prompts and everybody builds off each other's prompts. And they go, hey, I tried that, but I added this thing and it made it great. And they put that in because this is the way that we figure out things that are going to work. Encourage everyone to share what they create. Recognize that AI is a new technology that nobody really knows how to use best. And because it's changing so fast, the new ChatGPT 01 preview, which will soon be 01, is very accurate, but not perfectly accurate. And so this is an example of how things have changed a lot. In the tests where they test it against PhD humans in physics and chemistry and biology, it's beating the PhD humans in accuracy. And so we've got things that wasn't the case 6 months ago, right? And so we've got, because it thinks first before it spits out an answer. And so this is going to be true for many years. There's not going to be, we figured it out, here's the best way to use it. Because it's going to change so fast, we need to be experimenting the whole time. We foster improved learning with AI together by building shared prompt libraries that help professors and students. Honestly, you should have your students do this too and share it with each other because they really feel like they might be cheating. And if you're openly saying, hey, share prompts that work, if you find something that helps you learn, a dialogue that's helping you learn, something that's giving you good feedback on your homework, anything, make it and share it. Make that open. Open up tools widely to help everyone experiment and encourage students to discuss and collaborate on AI projects. Back to that paper. AI can be used, this is the Harvard study. AI can be used to effectively teach introductory material to students before class, which allows precious class time to be spent developing higher order skills such as advanced problem solving, project-based learning, and group work. This is what the future of education needs to look like. Class time is spent on the higher order skills of advanced problem solving, projects, group work, synthesis, creating and building things. And AI is helping them before class. It's helping everyone get up to the same level of understanding so that when they come into class, instead of having to waste a lot of time teaching in the class to get everybody into it, in the class, they get to start learning by using, learning by experimenting, learning by projects. Our classrooms need to be uncheatable because not because our defensive walls are so high, but because our courses are built so much better. So yes, cheating's a problem, but it's primarily a problem because we're still using the same approach to education that we've used for a very long time. And it's going to be a lot of work initially to change it, but it's not going to be a lot of work forever. It's going to the first generation of the new way to do it is going to be a lot of work. And then after that, it'll just be adjustments and improvements as we go, like you already do. The main thing that's the changes that are going to need to happen is we change how we do assignments. We build AI into helping people learn outside of class. So the inside of class, we're building much more projects and activities that actually help people synthesize. And that revamping of education, revamping of how we use our time together makes it just as useful if you have a class of 800 as if you have a class of 18, because they still can use AI to learn things developed by you, built by you, but they all get basically a personal tutor and then come in class and do things together. So that's it. That's my presentation for today. It's not usually I go into way more specifics on how AI works or the technological parts of that. I don't think you need that so much because I think you've been talking about that for 2 years. What I'm hoping I can get across here is that this is going to take work on the front end, and education's either going to get worse from AI or it's going to get better. But I believe that we have the chance to fix many of the problems that we've been stuck with for hundreds of years using AI if we do it well. And you're the generation who has to do the hard work on this. And you know, your future self will be grateful, but so will the future educators, because you were the ones who figured out how to rebuild classes in a way where cheating wasn't the main concern. And don't ever use AI writing detectors. But that cheating wasn't concern anymore. Education was the concern, and you suddenly had a new tool that allowed you to do that better. All right. Questions?
Okay, David. Well, thank you very much. That was great. So I will speak in English, in my Mexican Spanglish version of English. So David can more or less understand what I am saying. And we have several questions and comments. Some of them are in English. Let's cover as many as we can we have 13 minutes for the Q&A section.
Great.
Jose Luis Mendez asks something about mathematics, because he says that his math students, I mean, the AA agents do not give responses that are 100% accurate. What's wrong with the technology? Because he says that he triple checks the prompts and try at least 3 different agents. What's the issue with mathematics? Some comments about that.
Great. So math is a hard one because these are built in a way that doesn't inherently make them great at math. And so they have to go to great lengths to make them better at math. So the new versions that are coming out, like O1 Preview, are dramatically better at math, but still not perfect. So luckily, that Harvard study I used was a study that was in a topic that was like math and physics. And so it was in an area where there are very right answers. And so the way that they did that was they built in step by step in the prompt. They built in step by step how to do the right answer for the AI, and then it made it so that the AI didn't make those mistakes. So if you're trying to teach a certain principle, when you're building the prompt, you show what the right answer is in there. You show the step by step that you want them to take the student, as if you were teaching a single student. And then so it'll take a little bit more time to build these. But once you have that, then you can use it with all your students going forward, right? Because it can take them step by step because you already showed them how. So these will get much better. Even the newest versions are getting much better. But in areas where math is the hardest one, honestly, in areas where it is prone to mess up, you're going to want to build it. Look at that study and see how they built it, and you'll see that you can make sure that it doesn't hallucinate by giving it step-by-step instructions on how to do it correctly. And then when it's helping the student, it will be able to pull from that and give them step-by-step instructions of how to do it correctly because you already made sure that it was right. Besides that, also just look forward to the future because the new stuff coming out is much better at math. We're seeing great things in math, but math is still a harder area.
Okay, David, thank you. Susie Rodriguez asked, how would you cope with the bias that is inherent in AI when it comes to education? Some comment.
Yeah. So bias is an interesting one. There's been lots of studies on bias, and the best way to think about these is that they reflect their training. And so, but great work has gone into making them less biased. So what we find in studies is that they are biased, but they're less biased than most humans. And we already have humans teaching, and the humans are teaching with a lot of bias, and the AI has a little bias. One of the interesting things to me is that the AIs behave very differently depending on what language they're in. And in fact, we've already done good studies on, doing various tests that we do in psychology for different cultures, like Chinese culture versus German culture versus American culture. And we found that if we interact with the AIs in those languages, they end up essentially acting more like the people from that culture on average. And so it's an interesting thing because it's like we've created little people, little brains, and they do have some bias, but so do all the people you work with. So it means that you can never hope to get rid of all bias in these because they're trained kind of like the human's brain is trained, and they have a lot of the same failings as the human brain does. But if you treat them more like how you treat working with a human, not because they actually are a person, but because you understand that humans also have a bias, and these generally have less bias than most humans. And so if there's an area where you need to be careful, then you can build that into it. But in the most cases, not that different than working with people. It's just not perfect. And that's kind of always going to be the case in a lot of these answers.
Thanks, David. Gertrudis Gonzalez asked a couple of questions. One related to the several scholars think that AI will cause problems like the style of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, the Disney Mickey movie, Mickey Mouse, cartoon, where things get out of control. How to prevent this? And the other part of the question is if you know of any studies about the impact of these platforms on social isolation, young people, and the fact that they do not ask their parents, their teachers, or their friends to solve questions.
Great. So 2 different questions that neither of them have firm answers. So I'll do the best I can. The first one is AI going to run amok and take over and start running the show? Maybe. Probably not. Nobody knows, right? Great effort is going into that to try to keep that from happening. I will tell you my personal opinion. And my personal opinion is that's not what I'm worried about most. AI is very powerful, and I'm worried more about how people use it. So when you're putting a lot of power into the hands of everyone, then that means that one bad actor can do really bad things potentially with AI. So I'm less worried about AI becoming a bad actor than I am about bad people doing bad things with AI. So still a great concern, but not quite the same as the Sorcerer's Apprentice. More like the Marvel movies where they have those stones in their hands, and if the bad guy gets the stones, they can do really terrible things. More like that. On the second one, wait, remind me again what the second one was, Melkor?
Yes, the impact on social
Oh yeah,
isolation.
on social. This one I think people should be talking about way more because it's going to be a mixed bag. There's already some studies showing that AI can cure isolation in some groups of people. Cure is not the right word, but help. For example, old people in nursing homes who have no living relatives and no one to talk to. If you give them an interesting AI, character for them to talk to, it actually helps them feel less alone. On the flip side is you have people who we just barely had a kid in the United States who just committed suicide because he felt like he fell in love with his AI girlfriend and felt like if he killed himself, he would get to go be with her. And so in that one, AI actually replaced the human. And so the question is, in what places is it going to replace humans, and in what places is it going to provide meaningful interaction? As dystopian and scary as that sounds, we don't know. But in the education setting, we get to decide that. I think, generally speaking, if we do this right, this is going to increase human interactions in education rather than decrease them. Because right now, most classes are you sit there silently, probably read Instagram on your computer while you listen to the professor talking up front. And all of a sudden, coming into class now, because you were expected to have learned things outside of class from AI, you come into class and now we put you in groups, we have you do activities, we have you do projects. And so specifically within the education setting, we can build it so that this increases human interaction instead of decreases human interaction. At a broader society level, it's going to be crazy, and I don't have really good answers of what exactly is going to happen. But there will be good and bad, I'm sure, and that's the only answer I can stand behind.
Okay, thank you. Well, there are many questions now. We only have 5 minutes. Let me try to summarize some of them. Several of the questions are related to the impact on the environment of the AI and how this should be included in educational activities.
Yeah, this is huge because the things that we know and understand about AI are going to take incredible amounts of energy, wild amounts of energy. And so in the United States right now, you already have Google and Microsoft who have both, and Amazon, all three of whom have made deals and partnerships in the last few months for the creation of new nuclear power plants and in very specific places to power these things, because it does take a lot of power. Now, I personally, it depends on where that power comes from, right? So if this means that we end up burning a ton more coal and filling the environment with a lot more pollution, that's a bad thing. If we can power it with clean energy, and my personal, I like nuclear energy. I'm a fan of nuclear energy. It's a clean energy. There's some risk, but it's very low and much lower than the pollution that we put in with other things. And so that's one where I'm actually unexpectedly surprised to see that this is finally getting people to push towards nuclear faster and away from fossil fuels, because you can't spin up fossil fuels that fast, but you can with nuclear. And so it's a real concern, and I think it's going to change the way that we do energy and infrastructure building all around the world, because it's going to become a new strategic priority. And we have to, that's happening no matter what. So we get to decide where that power is going to come from, and hopefully we make good decisions there.
Okay. Several questions and comments are related to the critical thinking issue. Some people believe that this will diminish critical thinking in students and teachers. One of the questions is, how can we use this to promote critical thinking?
That's up to us. So if we do this wrong, in the sense that if we don't change anything, it will hurt critical thinking, because instead of them having to think to do their assignments, AI can think to do their assignments. That's why we worry about critical thinking. But the only reason why that's a worry is if we're keeping assignments and assessments the same as before. If you change them, then there's very little critical thinking that's happening in a classroom, generally speaking, especially if it's a lecture right now, right? And there's not a lot of critical thinking even that's happening in a textbook. Critical thinking is when you are asking questions and getting answers and learning these sorts of things. So like we saw with those students at Harvard, they learned more faster because they were able to ask questions and get answers and those sorts of things. So one of my favorite things I ever built is I have a little critical thinking companion, and I just built it on ChatGPT. And whenever I'm wondering if maybe I'm not thinking these things through right, I've built it to specifically poke holes in my logic, to find all the mistakes in my thinking, and then to point them out to me and make me defend myself and find all the weaknesses in my arguments. And it's one of my favorite things to use when feel like maybe I'm just following the culture, or I'm agreeing with people too much, or I haven't thought it through. I'll go to my little critical thinking companion and say, I think this, and it'll come back and say, well, but did you consider this? And did you consider this? And it's actually great for me because it's like I have an arguing partner who's very intelligent and can help me think through things. So we have the opportunity to improve critical thinking. If we do things the same way they're correct, it will hurt critical thinking, but that's a choice. That's not inevitable. It can be better, not worse.
Okay, David. Well, we ran out of time. We have several dozen questions. What I will do is we will collect them and I will send them to you. And later, when you have some time, maybe with the help of ChatGPT or something, you can help us answer those questions. And then we will eventually put them in the site of the conference. Well,
That sounds great.
okay. We will share your slides with the attendees and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much, and it was fantastic. Thank you very much for
Thank you so much.